Hello, I'm Lorna. I'm an English teacher, and I would like to give you 4 tips to avoid getting discouraged when learning English. I'm making this video because I've read and heard many comments from people saying they tried to learn English or to improve in English, but got discouraged along the way, either because they didn't feel they were making any progress despite their efforts and all the time and money they put into it, or simply because they were not enjoying it. So instead of taking pleasure in learning English, they found it boring or even stressful. These comments came from people who had tried to learn English on their own, for instance, by reading, watching, or listening to content in English, from people who had tried learning English using an app, but also from people who had taken private lessons with a teacher or a tutor. I think that my tips can apply to all these kinds of people and can help them in all these situations. These tips are based on my own experience with my own students, so I know that they work. Whatever method you choose to learn English, here are 4 tips to avoid getting discouraged. My first tip to avoid getting discouraged is set a specific short-term goal. Learning English is a very broad goal. When can you say, that's it, I've learnt English? When can you say, I've reached my goal? It's too big and too vague a goal, so you can get the impression that you're never going to reach it, or that it's going to take years and years and years, and you can get discouraged along the way. To set yourself a specific goal, you first need to answer a very simple question, a question that I ask all my students on their very first lesson with me. Why do you want to learn English? The answer will be different for everyone. It can be school related. You want to get better marks or grades. You want to feel less out of your depth in class, or you have to reach a certain level to follow a specific study path or to obtain a certificate. It can be work related. You need to have a certain level in English to get a job abroad or in your own country, to get promoted, or to do your current job. And it can be for personal reasons, such as preparing for a trip to an English-speaking country, or because you want to understand films, TV shows, or songs in English, or for other reasons. From there, you can define what you need and a short-term goal that will help you meet this need. For example, someone who is just beginning to learn English can set the goal, I want to be able to introduce myself and have a basic conversation in English. Someone who needs to use English in their job, where they can specify what they really need. For instance, I need to be able to sell a certain type of products to certain types of customers. I need to be able to communicate with suppliers over the phone. I need to be able to speak to patients in a hospital. I need to be able to write letters or emails in English on specific topics, and so on. If you need to improve your average in English at school, you need to understand that your grades will be a consequence of the progress you make towards your goal. So you first need to review all the work you've done so far and understand what exactly is holding you back, and set a specific goal based on that. For example, I had a student who was struggling in English, but not in any other subject. I always ask students how they're doing in other subjects. I understood right away that he had like a mental block in English, and there was a past reason for that. So together with him and his parents, we set the goal to dare to speak in English, to dare to speak first during his lessons with me and then in class. I used tailored methods to help him reach this specific goal, and he was able to overcome this block. Something clicked into place, and even his teacher in class noticed a change. Once he had reached this specific short-term goal, he was able to continue learning English without my help and following the advice I'd given him. Setting a specific short-term goal is very satisfying and gratifying because it's more obvious that you're making progress. You stay focused and motivated, and you're resolving a specific problem. It's easier to complete a challenging task if you break it down into smaller steps. Once you identify your needs, you can set yourself one or more goals to reach, because you can set one goal after another if you have multiple needs. And if you're wondering if it's worth taking private lessons, Having a specific goal can help you control your budget. It makes it easier to plan how many lessons you need over a certain length of time. And it's easier to know whether the lessons are effective and to decide whether you want to stop taking lessons based on the goal you're aiming for, or maybe take more lessons to reach a new goal. My second tip to avoid getting discouraged is accept that you don't understand everything in English. How many times have I met people who told me they started watching a TV series in English but stopped because they didn't understand? Well, no, on the contrary, they shouldn't have stopped. Our brain is programmed to be able to learn a language even if it doesn't understand it at first. I'm going to ask you to go back in your memory and remember the time when you were a newborn or a small baby. You don't remember? That's okay. I'm going to tell you what happened. At first, you didn't understand anything and you didn't speak. And yet, your parents and all the people around you talked to you. They didn't think it's useless to talk to a baby who doesn't understand anything. And you started understanding one word, then two words, then three words. And then you started speaking one word, then two words, then three words, and then you just couldn't stop. So why did you learn your native language even before you went to school? Well, because you didn't have a choice. You were immersed in an environment where you were hearing your native language all the time, probably from the television as well, and you learnt your language without even realizing it. It's called passive learning. And passive learning is great because you learn without making any effort, without doing actual exercises, just by listening. Trust your brain and expose yourself to English as much as you can to recreate this English-speaking environment around you. Even if it's just for a few minutes, you can change the language of your favorite series for 10 minutes or until you feel tired. If it's a series that you already know what it's about, and so it's easier. I show my students how to change the language on their television or on streaming platforms if they don't already know how to do it. If you display subtitles in your native language, you will understand everything, but you won't learn much because your brain will not have to focus on English. To avoid getting discouraged, you can choose to gradually increase the level of the English content that you read and listen to. I had a student who had poor listening comprehension skills in English, and because of that, she had repeatedly failed a test that was very important to her. I first made her listen to short and fun content of level A2, which is the basic level. Then I gradually increased the level of the content I gave her, and after 4 months, she was able to easily understand audio content of level C1, which is the advanced or proficient content level. And the best thing was, she didn't even realize I had gradually increased the level. Her ears had become accustomed to English sounds, and she had expanded her vocabulary over time. And she passed her test. So trust your brain, be patient with yourself, expose yourself to as much English as you can, and accept that you won't understand everything at first, but you will get there. Passively listening to a language is very useful, but you need to complement this with more active methods to remember what you learn and be able to reuse it. So my third tip to avoid getting discouraged is link English to your interests. It's easier to memorize words and phrases if you use them in context. That is, if you use words in a conversation or in a text instead of trying to learn a list of words, for instance. And it's even more effective if it's a context that you find interesting, because you'll be more receptive, more eager to learn, but also because it's easier to remember what you learn if you link it to what you already know. And lastly, you're more likely to reuse what you learn. And obviously, if you listen, read, speak, or write in English on a topic that you love, you're much less likely to get bored or stressed. For example, if you like cooking, you can try to follow a recipe in English. My son went to a cooking school. His teacher had the great idea of asking the students to make a video of themselves cooking a dish and explaining the recipe step by step. So they each had to write a script in English, learn it with careful pronunciation, and film themselves. But it was fun to do. It was about a topic that they liked, and they could choose the recipe. So it was a very enjoyable exercise and a great way to memorize words and sentences that were going to be useful in their career. If you love singing, listening to songs and singing is a great way to learn English and improve your accent. And if you like video games, you can install a game in its English version. I was a substitute teacher in an agricultural high school where students learned how to make food products. I noticed that some of them did not know how to use the modal verb must. So I looked for all the safety signs that could be displayed in their work environment. I showed them these signs, and they had to write sentences describing these signs, such as you must wash your hands, you must not wear jewelry, and so on. At the end of the exercise, they all knew how to use must, they had learned essential vocabulary for their future job, and they'd had fun. During the following weeks, I was able to confirm that they remembered what they'd learned, because it's easier to remember what we find interesting. My fourth and last tip to avoid getting discouraged when learning English is use tailored methods. Methods that are tailored to what? First, you can use methods that are tailored to the way you learn. We're all different. We all have our weaknesses, of which we are well aware, but we also have strengths. As far as memory is concerned, some people have a very visual memory, others have more of an auditory memory, others need to copy things down, others need to be in action. Some people like theoretical explanations, others need examples, others need practical applications. Some people understand things right away and can even be impatient. Others need things to be explained several times or to be rephrased, or they need to ask questions to break down individual points, and so on. Some people may have learning disabilities that will affect a specific capability, such as writing or memorizing what they hear. I think it's important to understand what works best for us as individuals so that we can learn in a way that's effective for us. Second, the methods you use should be tailored to your personality and your needs. If a person is an introvert, they might not want to tell their life story. As a matter of fact, I've noticed that many of my students love conversation games where they're expressly allowed to lie. I use bluffing games, and that's really liberating. It makes them eager to talk because they can say whatever they like. For people that find it difficult or are less willing to use their imagination, I use visual aids where they need to describe a situation, for instance. Why do I use games even with adults? It's not just because it's fun. Games are recognized for their educational value, because that way you can repeat the same word or phrase 100 times until it becomes instinctive. And combining different methods can often be very effective. For example, a short theoretical lesson on a specific point of grammar where the student often makes mistakes, then a short exercise to check that they understand the theory, and then a well-designed game where they have to use and reuse this new point. Lastly, the methods you use should be tailored to your goal. If you work in a hotel and your goal is to make bookings or reservations over the phone, I would suggest listing the words and the sentences that you need and then practicing over the phone. We could do role plays where I would be the customer and I would imagine all possible situations and responses. Role play and simulation are extremely useful to picture yourself in the future and thus avoid getting discouraged. If you're preparing for an English test or exam, I will explain how the test takes place, the traps and expectations, and I will make you take practice tests until you're so familiar with the test that there's no longer any surprise or stress of the unknown. Every student and every goal of every student can require tailored and adaptive methods so that learning is both effective and engaging. So let's sum up my 4 tips to avoid getting discouraged when learning English. 1. Set a specific short-term goal. 2. Accept that you don't understand everything. 3. Link English to your interests. And 4. Use tailored methods. As I mentioned earlier, these tips can be applied if you try to learn English on your own. But I do think that it's easier if someone helps you. Why? Because in general, we know what we want. We want to learn English, but we don't always know how to get there. For the first point, a private teacher will help you identify your needs and the best way to meet your needs. In other words, they will help you identify the problem and even the cause of the problem and offer a solution. That way, they can help you set a specific short-term goal that you will be able to reach without getting discouraged. They will also help you measure your progress. For the second point, a private teacher will help you accept that you don't understand everything by using material that is suited to your level, by encouraging you to keep going, by reassuring you and explaining that it's perfectly natural if there are times when you feel you're not making any progress. I personally find it easier to stay motivated and not get discouraged if I have someone else encouraging me and keeping me motivated. Besides, it's nicer to speak English with another human being, isn't it? For the third point, a private teacher will suggest content that is linked to your interest. Well, that's what I try to do anyway. When it's relevant, I can suggest content that's related to my student's job, field of study, or tastes. I can also create a glossary with all the terms relating to an occupation or an activity, such as computers or engineering. As I am also a technical translator, it's something I specialize in. If you already have a good command of English, but want to improve your pronunciation, I can offer you a course that's entirely focused on English phonetics. And those are just a few examples, as every new student is a new opportunity to adapt, and for me, that's the whole point of private lessons. For the fourth point, an experienced English teacher knows lots of different methods to help you learn English. They won't rely on a single method and expect you to fit the mold. They can combine several methods and adapt them as your needs change, but also based on your feedback, because it's important to communicate openly with your private teacher so that they can adapt. I hope that you find these tips helpful and that they will help you learn English in a way that's both effective and enjoyable without getting discouraged. Because if you keep going, you will get there. Feel free to ask me questions and reach out to me if you're interested in taking a free first lesson with me without any obligation. Thank you for watching this video and see you next time.